BeyondMystic, and welcome to this very special book review entitled New Leadership. With me today, of course, is Mr. Riccardo Bosi, Lieutenant Colonel retired. You can find him at Australia1Party.com. He is the author, of course, of Greatness Awaits You, the 5 Pillars of Real Leadership. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Bosi. Mr. Bosi, welcome back to the show. How are you?
Jean-Claude, absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you.
I'm excited to be here and I'm excited to have this conversation with you. Leadership is definitely a subject that is very close and dear to my heart, also, since I was a child in the RCAC. We'll get into that a little bit later on. And even more so now with this YouTube channel, the mission of Beyond Mystic, and the direction of humanity as we're moving into the age of Aquarius. Suddenly, the discussion, the training, the study of leadership is more important perhaps than ever in the history of mankind. So I'm very, very excited for this interview today. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us here on this live interactive show. We are simulcasting both here on YouTube and also on our Ramble platform. Mr. Bosi and I promise to abide by all the rules here, and we're going to try to leave this amazing interview for you guys here on YouTube for as long as we possibly can. So we'll choose our words carefully moving forward. Mr. Bosi, before we start, I wanted to share with the audience members why I chose this particular poster, and more particularly the background. And to me, it kind of screamed out, "The storm is upon us." And I know we don't want to get into some of the keyboards and the letters of the alphabet too much here on YouTube, but I wanted you to share with the audience members here the concept of why the storm is upon us now, what situations humanity is facing, and why at this time new leadership is needed, but why inspired and true leadership is needed here moving forward. Explain the concept here of the storm is upon us and bring that to the audience members, Mr. Bosi.
Sure, of course. The storm is always upon us. It's like the seasons. Jean-Claude and I were talking before the show. It's just we're mid-autumn here, coming into winter, and we're appreciating the cold breeze that's blowing after a hot summer. And Jean-Claude shared that they're looking forward to the reverse coming through a Canadian winter, which is like nothing we experience here. But the storm is always upon us. This idea that we can create heaven on earth is fallacious. It's not going to happen. There's always something wrong. There's always something going to happen. And so regardless of whether it is raining now or not, you need an umbrella, you need a raincoat, you need shelter. What we're going through now is a particularly challenging storm. And we know that, and we're not going into the detail. You're acutely aware of it. But we shouldn't be surprised. In the military, one of my most favorite jobs, in fact, was being plans and development, thinking ahead of everybody else. So whenever I saw a situation, I instinctively went to what next? What's after this? We can't sit back and be complacent. We can't be ready for the last war. We're going to be ready for the next war. And then you realize it's always the same pattern: measure, countermeasure, measure, countermeasure, measure, countermeasure. And so the storm is upon us now because it's always been here, but now the truth of it is coming out. It's like nothing any of us have ever experienced, even preceding generations that have fought great and terrible wars at great human cost. It is nothing like they fought. And we know that because we're now in what's called total war, where whether you wear a uniform or not, you are engaged, you are being attacked. And so this concept of total war, it's familiar to us in the military, but civilians don't understand it so much so, but it's always there. And we are in the middle of it. And so right now, at this point in history, it is like a Canadian winter. It is brutal. It is killing. It will destroy. Now, this will pass. All things will pass. We know that. But right now we have to have it. Now, this is not the time to learn leadership. This is the time to have leadership already ready to go, locked and loaded, so to speak. And so as a situation arises, you can respond immediately. Once again, what I've learned in the military is that's key. You've got to be ready to go. Now, as a personality, I get reminded every day that people have difficulty nailing me down because one minute I'm erudite and polite and I can use polysyllabic words, wow. And the next moment, I'm a foul-mouthed, thrice married soldier that offends people's sensibilities. And that's because I can live in your world, but you can't live in mine. So basically, one must, as a leader, and this is the storm part, why is the storm important? because you must be ready to adapt at a moment's notice. You've got to be ready to go now. Just because something changes doesn't mean you are not ready. You must be ready. The storm is here now. Excuse me, I'm 63 now, so I've been in the workforce for 40-something plus years, 45 years. And each one of those experiences, just like each one of you, has been preparing you for this moment. And so if you're paying attention, you are ready to go. You can see, you can understand, you can plan, you can anticipate, you can communicate. And this is why the storm, without precedent, the war for the world, and there have been many wars for this world going back well beyond our recorded history, because there's evidence of that too. And we can touch upon that if you want to, Jean-Claude. But right now, the storm is here, and this requires every one of us, man, woman, and child, to step up like never before. We can no longer outsource our future to others, because we are in this situation because that's exactly what we've done. We've outsourced our judgment, our decisions to others.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. There was a little bit of an echo. Maybe, Mr. Bosi, if you can bring your microphone down maybe one notch, and on your speaker or your keyboard, please bring down your speaker volume just a tad as well. So maybe we're getting...
How's that? Is that any better?
I'll check the audience members. Give us a 5x5 if Mr. Bosi's echo...
Testing. 1, 2, testing.
Sounds better on my end. Okay, let's keep going here, and I'll keep monitoring the chat. Maybe I'll just mute you for a second here during the interchange. Mr. Bosi, we just did this show about a month ago describing here this Pluto planet moving into the age of Aquarius. Now, every time this has happened in the past, the last notable alignment was 1789, where, of course, we had the storming of the Bastille being the prison and the symbol of the royalty monarchy quashing any opposition. We're seeing a setup with that now, with perhaps the arraignment of Mr. T, we'll call him that here for YouTube, and other political refugees, whether they were truth seekers, whistleblowers, still people in jail here. And we're moving into an age where suddenly there's this huge, great awakening happening. Now, you mentioned earlier that we can't start training for leaders now, and to some extent, I agree with you. We need leaders ready on deck now for the issues that are upon us right now. But we also need to, in French, we say préparer la relève. We also need succession planning here. And as we're moving into this age of Aquarius, and we're seeing the infrastructure around us crumble, by necessity, we will need a new type of leader also moving forward. So perhaps that's part 2 of this conversation. But for today, I want to start with, what was your mission? What was your intent when you wrote this book? It's very different than other leadership books. Share the audience members here why you were guided and why this was so important, and why you're so passionate about leadership.
Well, it leads on from what you just said, strangely enough. And the answer is very clear. And please don't misunderstand the words I'm about to say. It was to build God's army. Now, by God, and this is where people are going to start tearing their party dresses and running around with their hair on fire. Call them what you will. Source, the universal, God, whatever. And let me just, and this is key, so please understand why I wrote this. And it leads to exactly what you were saying, Jean-Claude, this succession planning. Whenever I do a talk, and I've spoken to the large crowds, but I always tell the young people, I ask them to put their hands up, all of those under the age of 20, and they range from the mid-teens to higher, I guess. And I say to each and every one of them, start making your diary now, because in 50, 60 years, we'll all be dead, and you'll be one of the last survivors of what you actually saw, heard, and felt. Record it, because people will lie and try to twist it into something else. You are the future. You are the record keepers for what actually occurred here. Good, bad, and ugly makes no difference. And so this is this beginning of building God's army. Now, I call it God. You can call it the universal. You can call it source. It doesn't matter. What I'm talking about is the creator that is all that is seen and unseen, a powerful intelligence outside of space, time, energy, and matter. And just ponder that for a moment. A powerful intelligence outside of space, time, energy, and matter, because that's what the universal, the whatever would be. And why is that important? Because here's a question for you. To whom do you owe fealty? Fealty being loyalty, allegiance, in the broadest possible sense. Now you have a loyalty to your family, you have loyalty to your community, you have loyalty to your country. You have loyalty to humanity. And these are all important subsets of what's most important. You owe your fealty to your creator. It's as simple as that. And so in order to demonstrate that fealty, you must work in accordance with what you understand that powerful intelligence intention is. Now, for me, it's quite simple. And exemplars of this have been throughout history. Mine, for example, the best from my perspective is the carpenter, Jesus Christ. He taught us, he was the best of us. He taught us how to live, love, and to die. Then you have others, the Buddha. And the messages are all very, very similar, if not identical. The Dafa, for example, the way, the great universal law, the way, the Dafa, comprising its three characteristics, Zhen, Shan, and Ren. Zhen meaning genuineness, truth. Shan being compassion and love. And Ren being forbearance and patience. And if we look carefully throughout the history that we have seen, these are the exemplars of the same message given in different languages. And so back to your question, why was the book written? Because right now, every one of us needs to step back up into what was quite normal, even 70 years ago, the idea of the spiritual being a key part, the alleged division between science and spirit during the Enlightenment, where science presumed to be God. And these false divides that have infected our thinking for generations, we must dismantle that. And just very quickly, I know you got a lot of questions, but why is that important, that alleged divide? Because all the great minds up until the Enlightenment actually relied upon the universe being comprehensible. It was put together by a rational mind, and therefore, by examining nature and life, we could see an underlying pattern. This is not random. And so that's why the spirit must be considered in part of as we move forward. And so it's very simple. Build God's army and serve him.
Okay, very good. I love that. And yes, ponder some of those first words from Mr. Bosi there. Maybe rewind the tape and you'll understand why that is a bigger answer than you might think. Going back to things don't just happen, in your book here, we're talking about why leadership is so important at the beginning of the book. I'm following here with the audience members. I'm at page 6 right now. Things do not happen. Things are made to happen, John F. Kennedy. So, Mr. Bosi, why is leadership so important to study? Like right now, it's not part of our curriculum at school. Of course, in the military, it's taught in the maybe around the boardroom tables, it's taught. But for kids growing up today, leadership is not really a skill that's taught to them unless perhaps they were engaged in some paramilitary activities, the Boy Scouts, the cadets, things of that nature. Why is it so important today? And what would you say to the parents watching the show here today too? Why it's so important to bring these conversations up with their children?
Oh, absolutely. Well, the best way to demonstrate the importance of leadership at every level, and it should be a subject at school. And cadets, for example, I was a cadet too, and it was wonderful. But understanding that military leadership, and for those of you who are concerned, this is a book on military leadership where you yell at people and it's got stories about battles. It's got none of that. Because what the military does is called command. It's a subset of leadership. Command is the lawful execution of your authority. And that's valid. That's important. Got it. But leadership is far more profound, and command is just a subset. But you must learn those skills. They're the hard mechanics of leadership. Then you've got the softer, gentler art of leadership. And that's exemplified by the child at school who stands between two men in a fight, two boys in a fight, and holds them apart to create peace where there is conflict. See, that's leadership. But why is leadership important? The easiest way is to see what happens when leadership is absent at every level. We have exactly what we have now. We have children being taken away from their parents, the parents not realizing they are responsible for their children. They have the final authority over their children, as long as they don't interfere with the child's rights as individuals. And yet we have police and militaries dragging children away. So look at the world right now and tell me if you like it. And if you do, that's what the world looks like without leadership at a deeply personal, in an individual level and at a family level. Because that's the foundation of every society, good and bad. If the family is secure and safe, then everything has a chance of success. And that's why attacking the family has been such a major goal for those who would destroy us.
Right.
But look at the world today. Do you like it? Do you think its values are correct? Are we heading in the right direction or not? Lack of leadership has led us to where we are. They can never, no government, no authority, no monarch, nobody can defeat a people who know who they are and where they're going and are willing to step forward as leaders to achieve that objective, because there are more of us than them. We are many, they are few.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Thank you. I appreciate that. You just mentioned you were in the cadets, and just before I started the show, Sarah reminded me that I had a picture, and she brought it up. I took a screenshot of it, and I brought it up. This is from 1984, 82, perhaps. This was the Valcartier military base in Quebec, and you can see me, the tall guy there at the top right corner, a young cadet. Indeed, this was a leadership course. In fact, this was the 6-week summer camp leadership with the military base there of the Les Queues Plates was their emblem. Anyways, they were engineers, military engineers. Really, really a fascinating time for me as a young child. Before we go too far in this conversation, too, let's first define leadership. Because all of this is going to be set in stone here with that definition, and we're going to be having a common basis here for the rest of this conversation. Mr. Bosi.
Sure. And this is a definition I had to come up with myself, because after being in the military for a quarter of a century and then in business for almost the same amount of time, I read and understood many different definitions, and most of them made sense, particularly when you're a young boy, you're on the make, you're trying to understand what's going on, and you latch onto something. But as I lived my life and became more experienced and worked with some truly great leaders, I had to define for myself what it was. And it was an interesting process. And in the book, I recommend everybody come up with their own definition, because as I say at the very beginning of my book, listen to all, believe none. You must make up your own mind. And it's not a cop-out. That's actually, you must do what you must do, which is you must decide for yourself. And so what I did was I wrote out a full definition of leadership, and it was probably a paragraph long. And then I condensed it until it no longer made sense. It was so concise and it was incomprehensible. And I slowly stretched it back out. And I recommend you all do the same. What is leadership to you? Because in that process, you'll begin to define it for yourself. And I've defined it for myself in the book, and we'll be talking about that. But you must do this for yourself, ladies and gentlemen. What is leadership for you? And then understand it will change as you change. But here's what I ended up with. A real leader is one who, using nothing but what they are, they unite many to achieve good. I'll say that again. It sounds very simple, but it is so pregnant with meaning. It has a density beyond lead, because its impact on your life, once you integrate an idea like that into your life, everything changes for the better. A real leader is one who, using nothing but what they are, unites many to achieve good. Now, as you can see from that definition, using nothing but what you are. I was going to say,
but what am I?
And there you go.
What they are, we could get into the defining
of
you as a human being, or as a triune human in Manifest Destiny, or Thinking in Destiny by Percival. But yes, keep going, Mr. Bosi. And folks, if you have the book and you're following us, we're on page 10 now with this definition. Go ahead.
But that's exactly the point. At what point do you want to look at this? And then we start to look at ourselves and we say, okay, well, I'm a physical being. There's no doubt about that. I'm also, I have a mental capacity. I have an emotional capacity. I have psychology, and I have a spirit. So what am I? And just asking that question will bug you. And you'll wake up one morning and go, I've got it. And you'll write it down. And the moment you write it down, you'll find out it's inadequate. Because this is the nature of life on Earth. This is constant exploration and discovery. And all we're doing is discovering. We create nothing. We discover. It's been created. It's there waiting for us to find it. And so that's it. So what am I? And then that's the using nothing but what you are. So that negates manipulation, inducement, bribing, threats. You are diving into the essence of what you are. Uniting many. And this is key. We got that.
Let me, I'll mute myself again here. Go ahead.
Uniting many, because you must bring people together. That's what leadership is. You go first. Well, if you're going first, somebody has to follow. And that's, by definition, that's what leaders do. They go first. To achieve good. And people will rail against that, because then they say, well, what's the nature of good? And I say, welcome to the world of Aristotle, Socrates, and Plato. The nature of the good. Now you really must begin to understand. This is a complex, simple, clear, obscured, fun journey of discovery of your life. the more you study leadership, the more you lead yourself, the more you become one who others look to. This is in your best interest. Why study leadership? It's good for you. You'll become the best version of yourself simply by defining what is a leader and becoming one.
And it's so important also because all through your life, you're going to keep going through this. Yeah, all through your life, you're going to keep going through the process of the hero's journey. That is also part of the symbol there in the back of me. Let's go back to who and what I am. And for the audience members too, they're pondering that as we're saying that, so that they can answer the definition here in the book, Manifest or Thinking in Destiny. I don't know if I say Manifest Destiny. That's another show of mine. We talk about the triune human. And I want to bring up a YouTube video definition that Cliff High put out maybe a couple of years ago. And it really struck me at that time to kind of understand how we were built. And so, again, you can go through the big book here or just take it as read and go see this video here from Cliff High. But essentially, he's talking about the three major components of who we are: the knower, the doer, and the thinker. Inside the doer, there's 12 individuals. Doers, there's 6 females and 6 masculine. But most of the energy of who we are do not reside inside of this physical body. So you guys can go take a snapshot there. I'll bring the link down in the live chat for you guys if you're interested in all of this. But that brings up the context of the 6 generational warfare we find ourselves in. If in fact a lot of who we are is not residing in this body, how do we tie that into our capabilities, our abilities that are outside of this body, and how we marshal those, weaponize those in some cases, or inspire with those abilities that are outside of our bodies? How do you tie that into perhaps maybe not just the leader of today, but the leader of tomorrow as we move into the age of Aquarius?
Sure, that is a profoundly important question, because it's consciousness in its simple form is a non-localized event, which is a nice way of saying we have a meat suit, but the driver resides somewhere else. And this is alluding to what you're alluding to. And I love Cliff High, and I go to Cliff High for his erudition and intellectual holidays, because, you know, you get tired of dealing with the mundane and the prosaic. And I love Cliff. I respect immensely. But in terms of practicality, he's too far down the track. Does that make sense? Because Cliff's great skill is to be able to live in that world and then come down and give us practical advice. And that's where we need to be. Now, why do I say that? And I'll get to your question in a minute, but this is very important. Imagine, I've heard it said that there's going to be a star flash, there's going to be something, and a whole bunch of people are going to ascend to the 5th dimension. And my instinctive response, as was that of my wife, was that we better stay back here to help those that didn't quite make it. Mm-hmm. That makes sense?
Mm-hmm.
Right. What that means is, first of all, that's where our hearts are. It's the example that we were given. To use the Christian example, it's the shepherd that goes to find the lost sheep. And that's just our choice. So certainly I'm not recommending it to anybody else, but I'm just saying that's what's our thinking. Now, what does that mean? It means that we'll be here with a set of skills and understandings that are not our own. There is a plan. These words are very important. Please, this is not just filling in space. Please understand there is a plan. Do we have the capacity to manifest? Absolutely. Is there a plan? You betcha. Can you deviate from the plan? Yes. Can you do good things? Yes. Can you do bad things? Yes. But there's this difficult position between, it's a concept of free will and the concept of your own power and the source of that power.
Mm-hmm.
And these are large, complex questions, but in practical terms, to get back to the Cliff High bit, who can live up here in the highly intellectual, but then give practical advice. There is a plan. You chose it. You chose to be here at exactly this point in time. As a result of countless lives that preceded this one, you qualified for this job, but it doesn't look anything like you thought it would look like.
Mm-hmm.
And so you've got these skills that reside outside the body, these capabilities from outside the body that you now have the opportunity and you have the choice to actually employ or not.
Right.
But they are you, but they are not within you. And the art to life is to understand your place in it and to remember you're in the service of this powerful intelligence outside of space-time, energy, and matter.
You just brought up something interesting to me there too. Before I get into my question, I think I see, is that Janine Tarot by Janine with the $50 there on Rumble? She says, sending ravens to you too, divine. Well, thank you, Janine. Appreciate that. I wish you were here, but you're not allowed to be here for some reason on YouTube still. So we'll see you tomorrow, of course, on the War Correspondent show, guys. If you want to see the next edition of this, it's at 4 p.m. Eastern tomorrow, of course. Janine, Mr. Bosi, Julie, also with the astrology, and myself will be bringing up the latest news for you and the latest analysis here of the storm is upon us comment we made at the beginning of the show. So you don't want to miss that. You just brought something up here that's interesting. As we get into the definition of leadership, who we are, and all of this, you just talked about reincarnation. And in the military, you see, like, a lot of people watching the show here have seen military movies, and they often have this concept of whether or not the leader was born or made. How would you describe that in your terms, Mr. Bosi, and how did you address that in the book?
Well, in the book, I said I don't have time to talk about it because we're going to get to work. But I needed to ask the question, but I can afford to. Because there are distractions that concern people. The concept of reincarnation, particularly for Christians, let me address that, because I've copped no end of flack from biblical literalists who think I am now speaking to the devil.
Right.
And I can assure you that the good Lord speaks to us in many ways, in many different languages. And just to give people a practical example, if I was asking you how you're going in French, you'd say, "Comment ça va?" But if I was asking you in Italian, it'd be "Come va?" Mm-hmm. Now, even to the untrained ear, "Comment ça va" and "Come va" sound very similar. There is a similar origin. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Right, makes sense. Now, the trouble with some people is they will argue over, no, you shouldn't say "Come va," you say "Comment ça va." They attach themselves to the process or to the manner in which it's done rather than the idea behind it. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And so we have a lot of religious types that latch onto process, that latch onto practices that over time lose their meaning. And forgive me, but this is important. I'm going to drift. You have to remind me of your original question, Jean-Claude, because I need to tell you this.
Okay.
One of my jobs, and I'm grateful for every experience I've had, no matter how painful it's been, but one of my postings was as the senior instructor infantry wing at Goldie River Training Depot in Papua New Guinea, just outside of Port Moresby. Papua New Guinea is an island paradise to our north in Australia. So I was there for 2 years, and this is not an insult or a condemnation, it's a statement of fact. It's a pre-biblical barbaric society. It really is. It's quite, you wander around with you wander around with a weapon, because there's just no arguing with some people. But anyway, we were sitting around a bunch of expats, and expats community around the world, a quite interesting group. And again, without judgment, we were describing how primitive life in PNG is. Now, this is back in 92, but I don't think it's advanced much.
Mm-hmm.
And I made the observation to this crew, and I didn't mean to, but it stopped the conversation dead. And I said, well, to be fair, none of us here have actually advanced our civilization. We are no better than them. We are just replicating the behaviors that we were taught. For example, we will boil water in an aluminium pot. We'll put a tea bag into it, make a cup of tea, add some sugar or honey, and drink a cup of tea. That doesn't make us any more sophisticated than our hosts here in Papua New Guinea, who will bury a pig with bananas in a fire pit and leave it for a few days and then dig it up and eat the meat.
Mm.
We as individuals have not advanced civilization. And obviously that was, they found that as a bit of an insult. But in order to exemplify what I meant was this. In PNG and countries like that, during the war, they ran into white people and white technology for the first time. And so a plane would land, it would disgorge food and weapons and water and things, and it would fly off. And this was the gods were delivering goodness to the people. So what did we do to have the gods deliver goodness? So they replicated their behaviors, hoping the plane would come back. And there was actually a plane built out of bamboo, hoping to attract another plane. And this is 30, 40 years later. In more detail, again, same thing. There was an office where the secretary would be typing up reports. She'd get it to the boss would sign off on it and file away in a filing cabinet. But that they departed, but the typewriter, the desk, and the building, the little hut was still there, and the boss's desk. And so one of the locals sat in on the desk, and he would give directions to the secretary because he saw this being done, and she would type random letters on the typewriter, pull out the paper, he would make a mark at the bottom of the page, and they would file it away. And they were hoping if they did this, the plane would come and deliver more things for them. This is where people latch onto a practice, and they lose the entire meaning of the practice. There you go. There you go. And so they lose the meaning of the practice. Now, this is important for people to understand. This powerful intelligence communicates to us in a million different ways. Try to avoid the mindless repetition of practice and understand the essence of the message. And it goes back to, as I said, the Falun Dafa, Jern, Shan, Ren. And those three words, as I said, genuine, true, Shan, compassionate and kind, Ren, forbearance and patience. You couldn't find three better words to describe Christ's life on earth, the way he lived, loved, and died.
Right.
And so this is the essence of what we're trying to get through when we talk about this stuff, reincarnation. Now, reincarnation, born of, and I'm coming back to your point, but I had to tell you that story in order to describe my understanding of born or made. Reincarnation was part of the Christian world until it was removed by Justinian. So for the Christians that think that that's it, for the Jews that believe that the Talmud and the Torah are the word of God, the literal word of God, well, it's not, because the Talmud is Babylonian evil, and it is evil. If you read the Talmud, it's Babylonian, and what the Jews believe to be their religion today is actually Babylonian Talmud and the original Hebrew religion smashed together and formed into one. The Christian Bible there's a lot of nonsense in that too, and there's an Australian called Wallace, Wallis, who's written a book on that, and the origin and the interpretation of the Bible. And this is what has been done to us over and over and over again. And they tried it most recently where they've smashed together Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. They call it Chrislam. They built 3 temples in the United Arab Emirates. They're trying to smash together these 3 religions so they can capture people. There's nothing Christian about Chrislam. They removed Christ from it. Islam has lost its integrity. But this is a technique that the powers that be have tried many, many times before, for thousands of years. So this is not new. This is why you must forget the practices as such. They are not the path there. They will help you. It's the message that is key, and you live to that message. Now, I had to tell you all of that. Are we born or made? Both. Because as we live each life, we advance our soul. This is the purpose of life on earth, to advance our souls. And and we get given all sorts of awful situations, most of which in hindsight turn out to be blessings. And we have a choice to decide how we respond to this. And so some of us have fought this war over and over and over again. And to believe that this is a one-time shot makes no sense. It really doesn't. It makes no sense. So the reincarnation is part of it. We have been born, we have learnt, we have died, we have been reborn, and we take those lessons with us. But it's not as simple as turning up with all the lessons, because your life in this life requires a set of characteristics for you to have in order to learn the lesson that you wanted to learn. You chose this. And so whilst you might have been a great military leader in a past life, in the next life, you'll be an alcoholic. And the victory looks hidden. But depending how you live that miserable, pathetic life, could be the greatest victory of all, greater than any military victory that you achieved in the past life. So we are both born and created. We must work. We build up on the skill sets that we have grown over many lifetimes. But on top of that, this life, you've got to work. You've got to learn. You've got to study. You've got to experience it, because there's so many subtleties to it. So many subtleties to it. So we are both born and made.
So there are many great examples of both in our human history, of both made and born leaders. The reason I was asking that, and in French, c'était pas pour s'enferger dans les fleurs du tapis. It wasn't to trip in the flower pattern of the of the carpet. It was to get into the concept of people watching our show saying, I'm not a leader. I can't do what Mr. Bosi does on the screen. And that's why perhaps they would go in that frequency of saying, oh, maybe that's just for born people, born leaders. Maybe I can't make it myself. That's why I wanted to bring that question. What would you say to them, those people who came at it from that direction?
You have no choice. You have to be a leader. You have no choice. I'm sorry. You have to, whether you believe it or not, and you can. I have seen in my career, and much of our job is training and selecting and getting and promoting the right people to ensure the organization survives well. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember one instance. This is back in 1992, 93, when I was a company commander in the 1st Commando Regiment, and we had a competition, and there was one of my corporals. To my shame, I looked at him and went, "My God, thick as 2 short planks." He just lacked the intellectual horsepower. And we had this competition. Long story short, I was looking at the results coming in on the board, the progressive results, and there was this corporal's name right on top by a long margin. And I said to the warrant officer, "What the hell's going on here? How can this be?" Of all my section commanders, and I had 4 platoons of 50 each, so it was a big organization of 40 each. So it was a big organization.
Mm-hmm.
And he won, hands down. He drew the best out of his team. Was he the smartest corporal I had? Not by a long shot. But he had the ability to get the best out of his team, and they worked as a team, and they won. And that was an object lesson for me, is never make assumptions about anybody. Now, everybody can, but everybody must. Why? If you plan to have a family, you better be the leader, because nobody else is going to do it.
Right.
Who's going to lead your family?
Right.
The government? The local council? Are you kidding me? You must, and more importantly, you can.
By the very nature of the matrix of control we live under, if you're not a leader, you're a follower, and you fall back into being a slave of that matrix. So put that in your head. If that
By
makes
choice,
sense.
only by choice, only by choice. Look, I'll give you another example to encourage people. Imagine devoting your life and your entire life to goodness and kindness and a connection to source, only to be brutally killed and forgotten in some ancient barren land.
Mm-hmm.
Was that life successful? Well, that's what happened to Christ.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
See, the metrics by which you determine your life, your metrics, they're not God's. They're not Source's metrics. There's a bigger picture, bigger game at play here. Your metrics are not His metrics. Mm-hmm. And measuring results is all about, when you're doing a leadership job, you need to measure results. But understand this: just because you think, I wish I was on YouTube, I wish I had this. No, that's not your job. Your job is whatever your job is, mm-hmm. and do it to the best of your ability, and do it. And you will never know the implications of the way you handled it. Mm-hmm. Not till you get to the other side and you get to have the review and go, "Whoops, I didn't handle that terribly well. I asked for a challenge. I was given a challenge." Let me give you another example just to make my point. Down in my garage, we've got my son and I have a weights, bench press, and all the rest of it. Now, when I get under the bar, and there might be, I don't know, put a decent weight on there, 100 kilograms on the bar, and I'm pushing up, do I complain that the weight's too heavy, or do I say, "Thank you for being here so I can get stronger"? Because if I'm yelling at the weights, I'm an idiot. I should just walk down the garage, yell at the weights, tell them they're all too heavy, go up and have another beer. That's not wrong way to look at it. You get under the bar, and I learned this a long time ago when I first started doing weights as a young guy. And an older soldier, 20, 30 years more senior and experienced to me, and he was in the gym, and he was under the bench, and as he was straining incredibly under this incredible weight, he yelled out, "Good!" And I thought, what the hell is he doing? And then the penny dropped. If not for the weight, I would not be strong. So stop complaining about the weight. Say thank you and get on with it. Mm-hmm. Then before you know it, you'll become the person you're created to be.
Right.
You got to do it, folks, and you can and you must. Everybody can. Everybody can, and it doesn't matter what it looks like. Now, one last story just to get this point in, because Jean-Claude, it is so important. There was Helen Keller, blind, deaf, dumb girl. Helen Keller, look it up. Helen Keller, blind, deaf, dumb girl that became an inspirational source of education and enlightenment for generations. Why can't I be like Helen Keller? Why can't I be deaf, dumb, and blind? No, not the point of the story. Helen Keller was found when she was a little girl, and she was taught how to communicate, how to live. Now, imagine being deaf, dumb, blind child in a abandoned orphanage or whatever. I can't remember the exact circumstances, but a woman called Annie, by holding her hand, taught Helen how to comprehend the world around her, because she had no inputs to that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Annie is forgotten. Helen Keller is celebrated.
Mm-hmm.
Now, by the social media metrics of today, Annie was a failure. But by Source's metrics, by the Almighty's metrics, by God's metrics, Helen Keller's an absolute hero because she devoted herself to helping this little girl who could neither see nor hear nor speak.
Wow.
Nor hear nor see. She taught her how to become something special. And there's another example in the book. I won't tell you because we need to move on. But ladies and gentlemen, stop making excuses. Every one of you can and must. Every one of you can and must.
Mm-hmm.
And your metrics are not God's metrics, so don't worry about that. Become what you were destined to become.
We have a saying on the show, life isn't happening to you, it's happening for you. So it's kind of in the same lines of what you're saying there. I really love that.
Exactly.
And for folks who are trying to understand a little bit more, perhaps how their astrology ties into all of this, I just wanted to point you to maisonjupiter.com. Understanding your north node and your south node gives you some indications of some of those past lives where you've mastered certain skills and where you need to apply them in this particular incarnation. We did a video on this, and I think there's a course also on the Academy. You can check it out at beyondmystic.academy. But having this conversation here with Mr. Bosi reminds me that I have to revisit that also, because for a lot of people, they're trying to channel this now and to understand perhaps what those skills are, what those past lives are, and perhaps what that mission was they signed up in the first place to get here. We all drop in here and have this big veil thrown upon us, and we forget perhaps who we are, what we are, and why we're here. So that is the big part of being human right now, is answering that main question. Okay, let's get into the next segment here, Mr. Bosi. In terms of leadership, there's one word that seems to permeate about every aspect of leadership, what it means to be a great leader, what it means to inspire people, and that is the word trust. Why is trust so important? Share that with you guys.
Sure. Trust, excuse me. Trust is the foundation. Everything depends upon trust, because leadership, the role of leadership is a relationship between sapient beings, us, humans, dogs, animals, sapient beings. And without trust, you have nothing. Trust is the foundation. If you're building, the analogy I use is this: if you're building a house, you put down the foundation first, then you put up the pillars. Excuse me. Trust is the foundation. Without trust, you have nothing. Now, depending on in which country you live, trust is very different. I spent many years in the Middle East. And for a whole bunch of cultural reasons that I won't go into now, trust doesn't exist. There is no trust. Brothers do not trust brothers. Children do not, siblings do not, children do not trust their parents, and vice versa. The whole place runs on lack of trust, and there is a profound cultural problem that causes that. It is actually the result of a decision in their religion. But without trust, you can't do anything. You literally can do nothing. And importantly, if you don't trust yourself, why should anybody else trust you? Right. You must trust yourself. You must be able to make a decision and know that more often than not, you're going to get it right. If you don't trust you, why should anybody else trust you? No reason to. And it's clear. When you don't trust yourself, it is absolutely clear. The world will step aside. This is not my quote. This is somebody else's, but it's very true. The world will step aside for an individual who knows where they're going. They literally just move away, because most people will look in awe and wonder at the confidence with which you are moving forward. And that confidence is born of trust in yourself. Mm-hmm. When you trust yourself, others start to trust you. And there are things you can do to be trustworthy. You must be trustworthy. Must. That doesn't mean that won't necessarily lead to them trusting you, but you must be worthy of trust. But always assume. And in the book I say, please trust nobody ever. Not because everybody's bad. They're not. We are, by and large, trustworthy individuals, but we do. Hello, there's disasters out the door. We must be worthy of trust. But people are human. They get tired. They get pregnant. They get sacked. They get married. They don't get married. They get divorced. So there are all these events in our life that impact upon our reliability, let's say. And reliability is one of the elements of trust that I talk about. You've got to be reliable. Mm-hmm. And so you constantly check to see, is the person I'm trusting still worthy of my trust? And at bottom, you never trust a person. You trust an ideal. You trust an idea, because that remains like the North Star. It holds its position. You can guide yourself by that idea. People rarely are completely reliable. They can show you what's possible, but trust is the foundation. Trust is the slab that goes down before you put these other 4 pillars of leadership up, other 5 pillars of leadership. But trust is everything. If you did not trust, good example, you would not drive down the road if you did not trust to some degree that the driver coming the other way would stay on their side of the road. You wouldn't move. And the fact that you step forward every day into this unknown world, not knowing whether you have another minute on this planet or another 100, another 20, 30, 40, 50 years, there is that trust in you. Mm-hmm. And in a biological sense, and this is important, humans are the amygdala, that part of the brain.
You're going too fast. I was going to read the exact quote.
Oh, there you go. I'll stop talking and you go.
We're right on the same page. Well, I wanted to bring this up with the ET conversation because a lot of researchers are suggesting that perhaps one, at least, of the reasons why we're having some ET difficulties here on this planet, I'll say it this way here for YouTube, is because we're so quote unquote gullible. So I wanted to read this quote in the book. The default state is trust. And what the amygdala does is learn vigilance and distrust. It's encoded in us, but for a lot of humans, it's kind of detached. Do you think that that's part of our evolutionary process right now, where that, as Carrie Cassidy was talking about, perhaps in her Rebel Gene book, where this has been disconnected, the breaker turned off on us? And if so, how do we turn that back on? Because it's absolutely critical here in order to learn the leadership skills that we all need to manifest our own personal destinies. Mr. Bosi.
Yeah, I've not heard that theory, but that's plausible. That really is plausible. There's so much that has been done to us of which we're completely unaware. So I'll look into that. Thank you. But on top of that, if we are never betrayed, if life is so predictably safe, we lose the ability to, or we don't suffer the betrayal, and therefore we don't learn distrust. A metaphor for that is the dodo. The dodo is this large bird. For those that don't know, it was common in my day to know about the dodo. Large bird. Imagine a turkey twice the size of a turkey, just big. And I think it was on the island of Mauritius, but don't quote me on that. And it lived in isolation and had no natural predators. So when the Portuguese sailors arrived on the island, these dodos just wandered up, gobbled at them, and the Portuguese sailors said, "Fantastic!" Lopped off their heads and ate them into extinction. The dodo no longer exists. Why? Right. They could not discern a natural predator.
Right.
So that they were gullible, as we have been made. So we have been taught that life is predictable. We don't have 4 seasons anymore because we have air conditioning. Mm-hmm. It's never cold. It's never hot. We're always safe. We have everything we want at a touch of a button. It costs us nothing, and we are now comfortable. We have not been betrayed. We have not learned betrayal. We have not learned on a larger scale. Individually, sure we have. I mean, we've all been on both sides of that equation. I have betrayed and I've been betrayed. And the more you are betrayed and being betrayed, the more you learn. Now, the other side of this is no good either. Not trusting anybody anytime ever will lead to a solitary, pointless life because we must engage with others. So you've got to understand that betrayal exists. Mm-hmm. You don't let it freeze you into immobility. You step forward. But we as a people in the West particularly, less so in Russia because life is hard there, but we have been made gullible by a life of no challenge.
No nanny state, the nanny state to some extent.
The nanny state. There you go. That's the expression. We are a nanny state.
Yeah.
Somebody will look after me. If I lose my job, I don't have to worry about it because the government will feed my family.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if the government wasn't there, like when my folks turned up in 1951 from Italy, there weren't safety nets. And that's why the migrants that came to Australia in many, many years ago, they broke their backs working for themselves and their family, and they built the country along with the Anglos that were here beforehand. They worked their tails off. There was no safety net.
Right.
And now, I haven't got a job. The government will look after me. I don't have a husband. The government will feed and educate my children, and away we go. Right. And so we've been intentionally made gullible. And so now we don't know what to do.
Mm-hmm. On top of that, we're fighting this 5G war, the war for our minds, the war for what we think so that we act a certain way. And we're seeing here on alternative media more and more of these attacks and all of these supposed trusted sources, the fact checkers, of course. If you look at the fact checkers today, they're probably indication of the exact opposite of what they're fact checking. But I digress. But it's interesting. Speak to that maybe very quickly here, because I want to get into the 6 pillars of real leadership. But this idea that, or what would you say to inspire people to perhaps revisit or readjust their compass, or en français, changer notre fusil d'épaule, change your gun from your soldier. I'm not sure how to say that in English, but to really redirect yourself in that discernment, that vigilance, and maybe being distrusting of everything we hear now, because most of it is misinformation and disinformation designed to bring you back into the matrix. And we're trying to escape that and become the leaders of our own destiny. Mr. Bosi.
Sure. Best thing is just turn off mainstream media.
That's good advice.
Just turn it off. It's been said there 1,000 times. Stop listening. Now, we must not underestimate the difficulty that this is for that these people will face. Evidence. The evidence is there, and people choose comfort.
Mm-hmm.
They lack the capacity to challenge their worldview because everything that they have done. Now, this is not an insult or a condemnation. I had to disassemble just about everything I believed in. And I was raised a good Roman Catholic. I was an altar boy. I did all that sort of stuff. So I had this very clear set of rules. But fortunately, for whatever reason, I had a perspective that allowed me to look elsewhere. But I was wedded to it like everybody else. And there's this slow process of disassembling that which you believe. Mm-hmm. The best way to do that is to find evidence. Seek evidence of something contrary to your idea. And be prepared to pursue the truth. Because the truth will take you to the truth. You might as well start with it because you get into with it. Mm-hmm. But a lot of people will not do that. That's why we're now in this situation where we understand that a revelation will occur, stories will come out, and just about everything we've been told about the planet is wrong. And a simple physical way to start is something that doesn't challenge you too much. Now, life on Earth, intelligent civilization, China, 5,000 years, double that, go back 10,000 years, and we have the beginnings of a sapient civilization. And yet, if you look for it, you will find evidence of monolithic structures under the surface of the ocean that are hundreds of thousands of years old, potentially millions of years old. Now, that's an easy way to start. It's not challenging in the sense of my world view has been collapsed, but it starts to open the door to there is a history to this planet which we've not been told about. Mm-hmm. And just start looking. Mud floods, Tartaria. There's an infinite number of things to look at, but that's what they need to do. But most won't, because most people, as I might have said before, few people seek liberty. Most people seek comfort. And the example I use is the Hebrews that were slaves under Pharaoh in Egypt, and Moses led them out after the plagues hit Egypt. And as soon as it got tough, they were in the desert. Manna was provided, apparently. I wasn't there, but so it says. So their basic needs were met. But they actually revolted and said, well, let's go back to Egypt. At least we had food and shelter. Humans do not seek liberty. They seek comfort. This is part of the human condition that our adversaries well understand, and that's why they've been feeding that.
Right.
And so...
Thank you. I appreciate that. Let's get into, perhaps, again, I'll get into the 5 pillars of real leadership here in a moment. But I played this clip the other day. I think it was the last or second to last war correspondent show. We were talking about KGB defector Bezmenov and how he was describing the stages of subversion. And in those 2 first stages here, he explained how we got to the point here with these active measures that at some point the human condition here would get to being impossible to discern or to make decisions that are proper for themselves, because everything they know is basically upside down. And even if you show them the proof, you show them all the documentations, they would never see it or believe it until, quote unquote, here you get the jackboot up the ass or something to that effect. Just to finish on that, Mr. Bosi, we are very much oversaturated or over achieved in a lot of the tactics here of subversion in this particular storm is upon us segment. What would you say to those people here, or the people who recognize that and people around them, how to get out from underneath that, on top of not watching mainstream media? But what's your guiding light here to get out of that subversion tactic and maybe the clearing of the fog there for them?
Pray. That's it.
That's it.
Pray. This powerful intelligence, and please, this is so important. This is so important. This powerful intelligence that exists outside space-time, energy, and matter. And once again, please just ponder that statement for a moment. And do I have it here? Where is it? Yeah. I read a lot, ladies and gentlemen. I read a great deal. This is the Return of the God Hypothesis by Stephen Meyer. And he uses science and mathematics just to demonstrate not which God there is, but the fact that this powerful intelligence outside of space-time, energy, and matter is real. Darwin was wrong. We know that wrong. Even Darwin knew he was wrong in terms of origin of species, not fine refinements in the color of a bird's plumage. But there is a powerful intelligence outside of space, time, energy, and matter that is responsible for all of this.
Mm-hmm.
Go straight to the source. Don't go to your priest. You don't need an intermediary. His lines are open. Call now. There's no waiting.
Exactly.
And if you don't believe, pretend you believe.
Mm-hmm.
But if you want to get out of this, and I mean this, go direct to the source. Pray. Pray in whichever way you find appropriate. If you want to get on your knees and do the sign of the cross by your bedside, do that. If you want to stand in the garden with your feet connected to Mother Earth, with your hands out, drawing divine power direct from source, then do that. This is the best guaranteed way of getting out from this miasma of confusion in which we have been placed.
Mm-hmm.
And the awakening will come. The awakening will come immediately. There's only three ways to gain discernment. One is to study, one is to experience, and one is through divine revelation. Go straight to the source. It's the quickest way. You can read 1,000 books and make no advance. Pray.
I love it. Thank you. That's great advice. Okay, so let's get back into the last segment here for the show. I wanted to, again, we could probably do a whole show on each pillar here. There's a lot in there to learn, but let's go to the publisher here, Wilkinson Publishing. Let's talk about these 6 pillars of leadership and why that spells greatness awaits you. How do you tie that in for the audience members? Maybe we can break it down. We could take another 10, 15 minutes on that if you want, but just give them an overview here of how you see leadership and how you see these very important 5 components here in terms of building and making better the leaders of today.
Okay. My what I do professionally is I consult to major corporates on strategy, leadership strategy, and innovation. So that's it. This is my gig. This is what I do. And it's always the same. When I'm having the pre-meeting, I speak to the chief exec, always speak to the man with the shoes. Don't talk to anybody else. It's a waste of time. And he says, I want you to get our people to be able to get done what has to be done when it has to be done. I say, that's great. That's what everybody says. I want you to get them to do what we tell them to do. And I smile because it's always the same. And I say, well, that's interesting. And by the time we get there, and I go through the 5 pillars, there's the foundation, which is trust, and then they get 5 pillars. By the time we get through it, I say to them, do you realize how many of this has got to do with the people and how many have got to do with you as an individual? And it's all to do with you.
Yeah.
It's not about the people. The people are fine. You'll get that done. That's pillar number 4. So you've got the foundation, which is trust, and then you've got the 5 pillars. And the 5 pillars are your character, your capability, your invention, their empowerment, and you. So it's all about you. It's all about the individual. Get yourself in order, and you will become a leader. If you think it's about them following your orders, you've missed the boat. Mm-hmm. You've completely failed. Now, just to summarize that really quickly, in simple emotive words, because I like to condense. I like value for money. I like return on my investment.
Right.
Courage, wisdom, faith, love, you. Courage, wisdom, faith, love, you. Now I'll go through that very quickly. The first pillar, well, the foundation is trust, as I said, but the first pillar is your character. And the first quality of character is courage. And that's not me speaking. This is Socrates. This is Aristotle. Courage guarantees all the rest, because you can have everything else without the courage to step forward, nothing's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So courage, that's your character. Wisdom, that's your capability. The second pillar, your capability, what you can do, what you can make happen. Key word there is wisdom. The third one, your invention. A leader must create something new or must discover something new. That requires faith. You can't prove it, but you know it. Their empowerment. That's love. We're finally now talking about the people you are supposed to be leading. That's only the fourth pillar. Their empowerment, and that's about love, coming from a place of love. And the last one is you. And the word there is you.
Mm-hmm.
Who are you? What are you? Once you discover that, once you discover your place in this magnificent creation, the nonsense falls away. It doesn't mean effort's not required. A lot of effort's required. But the struggle to make the right decision that's effortless. You know what's got to be done. You know what's got to be done. So that's it. Your capability, your character, your capability, your invention, their empowerment, and you. They are the 5 pillars that are built upon the foundation of trust.
For today, I'd like to spend a little bit more time on number 4 and 5, their empowerment and you. In the Matrix, it's hard. You'd be hard pressed to find a leader who thinks about other people's empowerment. If you look at our government, from our federal, municipal, and provincial governments, if you look at our religion, you look at anything, it's really this top-down pyramidal structure, and it has nothing to do with their empowerment. In fact, it has everything to do with the enslavement of the individual. And any information that brings empowerment to people is soon evacuated, of course, George Orwell, 1984, deleted from our society. Why do you feel right now the empowerment or using the empowerment as one of the pillar might be a game changer here in terms of not just the astrology moving into the age of Aquarius, Pluto here, the destroyer, breaking down those pyramids, going to a multi polar world where we have more equity? Why do you think that empowering others is so powerful, one, and two, so detrimental to the old powers that were? I try to explain that to the audience, but watch some of the language here. We're still on YouTube.
Oh, no, that's fine, because I'll talk in terms of Australia One, because we're actually implementing this within our organization. And you're right, most organizations are pyramids, a few at the top and very broad base at the bottom. Our actual political structure, now forget this, it's actually a pyramid on it reversed. The organizationally within our constitution, after a probation period, because we know we're going to be infiltrated by all sorts of nasty people, but they determine, we have a constitution which we've written, but they determine who runs the show. It's a reverse pyramid. They are the power, and we're actually shaped and designed that way, and our process is designed that way. And I, like everybody else, must prove myself regularly to earn this top job. And if I get sacked, so be it. Great. That's the whole purpose. We are coming of age. We're coming out of a period of oppression, which people cannot comprehend. And now we're setting them free. So it is critical that we do that. Now, why is it critical we do that? One, that it's right. Why is it right? Because we are all equal in the sight of Source, God, the Almighty. None of us has any inherent right to rule or direct anybody else's traffic. If the creator of all that is seen and unseen has given us free will, who is anybody else to take that away from them, unless they impose their will on somebody else? So the first reason it's right. Secondly, it's imperative that we empower the people to make nations impossible to overtake one more time. It should be difficult to be in a political leadership position, because the people are rowdy, strong-willed, straight-back bunch of individuals who know what they want are difficult to govern. And that's exactly what you want in a free and prosperous nation, where growth of all sorts occurs. Because now we've got, in our case, 25.69 million Australians who, once they are liberated from this yoke, this physical, emotional, mental, psychological, and spiritual yoke, they can become what they are destined to be. And the country will never be taken over again by malevolent forces, because the people won't allow it. Mm-hmm. See, a population only suffers that which it permits the oppressors to impose upon them. The moment they say no, it's finished. So this inversion of the pyramid is not only right, is not only imperative, but it's the way life should be. Each one of us is equally free. No divine right of kings, none of that nonsense.
Right. Wow. Folks, I'm probably going to isolate this clip, just rewind 2 minutes, because that's the header for this episode. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. The last part, of course, is you. We spent a little bit of time at the beginning of the show. We talked about the reincarnation. We talked about the fact that we are mostly non-local, or most of us is not corporeal inside this body. In the book, I think it's David Dita, The Way of the Superior Man, we look at balancing both the divine feminine and the divine masculine, and only through that balance can you become a true leader, a true master of self, as he teaches self-mastery. Can you explain how you see that self-mastery, that balance between the divine masculine, and the feminine, and how you use those principles in your life also, and how you might encourage other people also to seek that balance within them first, the understanding of who they are, what their mission is, but to really have a better and this is difficult for YouTube, because some of those terms have been hijacked in the transgender agenda and many other things, right? So I don't want to go into that route there of the conversation, but Mr. Bosi, how do you bring that into perspective here, the understanding of balancing oneself here to become a better leader?
Oh, leadership is service. Everyone must remember that. They have the idea that the general is the leader, the president. No. It's service. And it is service without the expectation of reward.
Service
Get
out
that
of
in
love.
your head, you'll understand leadership.
Service
Everything
out
else
of
is
love.
something else. Sorry?
Service out of love.
Yes, absolutely. Without the expectation of reward. Service, my God. Christ washed the feet of his disciples, or his apostles. This was a physical example of you must serve the people. I mentioned this before, but I'll mention it again, I think, in a previous interview. My father passed some years back, and he's a remarkable man. Remarkable man. I was blessed to have him as a father. Not perfect, but brilliant. And I was fortunate enough to have that last conversation with him. He'd been in hospital. He was drifting in and out of lucidity. And we knew he wasn't long for it, but I managed to have a conversation. And the one thing that came through was serve the people. Now, a man on his deathbed tends to tell the truth because something happens. Deathbed confessions, they're real. Yeah. They are real. All of a sudden, somebody decides, you know what, I better, just in case they might not be perfect acts of contrition, but at least they said it. But anyway, a man on his deathbed tends to tell the truth. And he said to me, serve the people. Because I think he looked back on his life, and his greatest successes, inverted commas, came when he served, and his failures came when he ceased to serve the people. Leadership is service. Ladies and gentlemen, get this into your head, tattoo it somewhere, remember it. This nonsense of the general, the president, the chief executive. No. Leadership is service. Now, that's point number one. You must serve. You must serve without the expectation of reward. Why? Because it's the Almighty's metrics, not yours. Now, the second part was the masculine, feminine. Mm-hmm. For whatever reason, I've had no problem with that. Yes, we have a set of biological and physical imperatives that manifest themselves differently in men and women. Testosterone is highly correlated in pro-social situations with cooperation. That's why men cooperate so well. Women have testosterone too, but they've got estrogen and progesterone, which tend to mess that up a bit. And so you don't naturally get it. But that doesn't mean you are bound to that biological constraint for your life. By a conscious act of our reason, we overcome the desires, the biological desires we have, transcend that and try to become more. And this is key, because the biological imperatives are there. I get it. Mm-hmm. Now, as some of you might know, my wife's in a wheelchair. She has multiple sclerosis, and she went through a few years of chemo trying to deal with that. Didn't help. But I cook and clean, and I do all those things around the house. Is that a feminine job? No, it's the job that's got to be done. You do your duty. Duty is something you've got to do because it's got to be done. Now, I'm a Special Forces Lieutenant Colonel. Retired. Does that mean I bark orders at my kids? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. In fact, you wouldn't believe it. I'm gentle and sweet, and I'll bribe them with chocolates if I need to. Occasionally, I'll recalibrate them. But the point is, we are responsible for these beautiful souls.
Yeah.
And our job is to make them as full as possible. Now, are they going to be lovely? The two, I've got one boy's 23, magnificent, and there's nothing like raising a child to honorable adulthood. My God, what a satisfaction to know that they're good to go. They'll make mistakes, but they're good to go. But he's on his way. I've got these two beautiful girls, and they're going to become like my mother, beautiful, elegant, glamorous, but intellectually powerful, dynamic, and can hold a room to silence if she needed to. She was extraordinary. So they have to get that balance too, but they have to learn that. So they have to learn the masculine and feminine. I have to be as gentle as a lamb and as ferocious as a lion, and I have to pick my moments for both. So one does not excuse the other. And you'll hear people online, and there's these idiots, and I call them idiots, and I intend it as an insult. They are imbeciles. They are subject to their biological needs, and it's like they haven't advanced 1 iota into adulthood. And I won't mention names because I don't want to give them airtime, but they appeal to the base nature of humans, and these are the people you need to avoid. It's time to grow up.
Right.
Male, masculine, and feminine. You absolutely need both. I need both. I was a better commander in the military because I knew how to be a mother as well as a father.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the trick. You've got to live in both worlds. I can comfortably live in both worlds, and that's why I can dance between making sure that what did I make the other night? Zucchini with a freshly made homemade tomato sauce with mozzarella over the top, and do it with so much love that it just tastes different to somebody who's just slapped something together.
Right.
You've got to care about those things. You've got to care. You've got to care.
Don't forget the sweet basil. Okay. We can swap recipes all you want. I'm a big foodie myself. Okay.
Hang on. I just did something then, which is the OK symbol. Now you watch. They're going to say I'm a Mason or something.
Oh, the 666 Bosi. Oh my God.
No. That's if you're a scuba diver. This means ascend. That means descend, and that symbol means everything's okay. Oh God, here we go. The whole thing's now shot, Jean-Claude. You're going to have to burn this tape forever because they're going to say, "Oh, look, see, he's part of the Illuminati." My God, there you go.
Please don't do the German salute. No, I'm gonna have emails for a whole month. Okay.
No, they tried that. They tried that once before. I was giving a talk in front of 100,000 people, and I had my arm out. I was pointing, and they snapshotted that one thing to make it look like I was.
Of course.
And just so everybody's clear, I've been called an anti-Semite and a Zionist at the same time. So, I am all things to all men.
Perhaps for the next show, we can talk about the swastika and what it truly represents in terms of energy and space. But that's going to be for another show.
Hold it. Just stay right there. There we go. Look at that.
There you go. Okay. What's that term? You're tipping at the windmills. What's that term in English? I don't know. You're trouble, Mr. Bosi. Okay, real leadership. I wanted to read this at the beginning because you just said something about we need to grow up here. Because I wanted to mention that balancing between the divine masculine and feminine, in the ways you've described, yes, and also I wanted to add in the way that we think and the way that we inspire people. The whole idea of left brain, right brain, being very analytical, whereas on the feminine side, you feel more, you have more compassion, and this leads into also being able to empower people around you. So that balance for leaders, in my humble opinion, is very important. That's why I was bringing that question up to you. Real leadership. When I was a child, I spoke as a child, I understood as a child, I thought as a child, but when I became a man, I put away childish things. Okay. As you mentioned that earlier, I thought, just read that. That struck me when I read the book earlier. Okay. You talked about deathbed confessions. Can we take a quick, maybe 5-minute detour? I wanted to talk about a famous deathbed confession, and then we'll get into the conclusion for your show. What do you think? Okay. So, Admiral Byrd, deathbed confession, Antarctica, North Pole. Do you know anything about that? Do you want to share perhaps your point of view on some of the rumors of what was in his diary, what was purportedly repeated, and how that perhaps ties into the fifth pillar of leadership, the you, because in order to understand who we are, we have to know where we come from. And perhaps, as some are suggesting, we're going to find a lot of that information also in Antarctica, and perhaps sooner than later, judging by what's happening in the world now. How would you tie all of that in for the audience, Mr. Bosi?
Okay, Admiral Byrd, US aviator that allegedly, and I only say allegedly because I haven't been down there, but discovered subterranean life forms down in Antarctica. And there's revelations of alien activity, other species, monolithic structures, extraordinary stories, and it was all hushed up.
Mm-hmm.
So that's Admiral Byrd. So that's the story about Antarctica. And what's interesting about Antarctica is that it's the one place where every nation has had agreed on a treaty. They've had major wars, hundreds of millions of people killed, but we all will obey our treaty on Antarctica, which sends up a red flag immediately. There's something here to pay attention to.
Right.
People are going to find out a lot about the human race. Are we 6,000 years old, created in 6 days, and then God took a breather on the seventh? Are we the accidental result of blind, pitiless indifference, as Richard Dawkins, the atheist, might suggest? Or were we a life form that was tinkered with by higher life forms, genetic experts, that tinkered with us and created us? And now there's evidence coming up about dissimilarities between different races on Earth. And this is not a prelude to racism or superiority. We are all equal. We're all made in the image of God. We all have that divine spark. But the mechanics of who we are and how we got here are far different to what we have been told. And the evidence will, bit by bit, be revealed. It will challenge people's religious beliefs. But that's what's going to happen. I've seen and heard enough to know that the history of the Earth is much older than we are led to believe. Much older. We're talking hundreds of millions. Allegedly, okay, Big Bang 13.8 billion years ago, life on Earth 4 billion years ago, and civilization, according to what we're allowed to know, kicked off about 10,000 years ago, and we've dramatically evolved since then. Well, if you look at the cultural, intellectual development of human life on Earth, on a chart, there's a spike and then it drifts down, and another spike and it drifts down, and then another spike and it drifts down. It's not this curving growth of intelligence upon intelligence. It's almost as if some life form had to come in and give us a kick start because we weren't doing it. How was it that agrarian skills were grown from one tribal group, one family group in Turkey, and then spread around the world? How was it that metallurgy was discovered? How was it that? So right. all of these discoveries appeared, but for no apparent reason. And so we're going to find out that there are potentially, and in fact, the evidence is pretty good. The evidence is pretty good that we were tinkered with by superior life forms that adjusted the DNA and produced us. Now, there's pretty good evidence for that. I'm not saying it's true or not true. I'm just saying there is evidence for that. Now, what does that mean to us? Well, to a tribe or to a species that's been created by another species, they would be called gods, wouldn't they? And I think people will find that maybe the ones that did the tinkering were referred to in books like the Bible, the Old Testament, as gods. The powerful
maybe we're the Papua New Guinea tribe, Mr. Bosi.
Say again?
Maybe we are the Papua New Guinea tribe you were describing earlier, celebrating the gods with the bamboo plains. Maybe we are doing the same thing here with our religion.
That's the point I was getting to, mate. You're right on the money. We are not as wonderful as we thought we are, but we are better than we thought we are, if that makes sense. We are all on this magnificent journey of discovery.
Yeah. And
what we're saying here now will appear to be so challenging to some, and that's fine. And in 100 years, they'll listen to this interview and they'll say, "My God, were they really that stupid?"
We had no clue. And speaking of having no clue and having amnesia, I'm trying to manifest this interview here with Graham Hancock and our friend Jay Widener, who's a contributor to our show. We wanted to talk about the amnesia of the past apocalypses here on the planet, and how perhaps they were also part and parcel the reason why we have amnesia and why some of this information has been obfuscated. Now, of course, we have the secret societies and all that at play, but anyways, I'm hoping to make this happen for you guys, so stay tuned. Hopefully in the next month or two, I'll be able to get these two amazing gentlemen back on the show for you guys. So thank you for the Antarctica little trip down memory lane. I really appreciate that. So to conclude, Mr. Bosi, and again, why this leadership subject is so important to me, so important for my children. Again, as we're looking at this new age, by the new energies that are coming in right now, by necessity, some of the old structures must collapse in order for us to build the new. Now, in the 5 pillars of leadership, the you part, understanding who you are and what your role is very important. And I think that moving forward here, we're going to see the inverse of that pyramid, as you just described, where we're going to go from the centralized power to a decentralized power, which means that we're going to give back the power to our local communities. So I think that leadership of tomorrow starts there. And I want you to share with the audience members words of inspiration for perhaps the young leaders that are listening to this now, perhaps the leaders of tomorrow who are listening to this, to really find a way to find their place in their local communities and find what needs to be done. Again, it's all about service and love. What would you say to those young people watching the show about navigating the world of tomorrow and being the leader here in those small communities that are going to rebuild this planet?
Not a problem at all. And it's up to the kids. We're doing our bit to build a foundation. You and I, Jean-Claude, be long dead. We are fortunate enough to be doing that deep digging, to dig a deep foundation upon which the youth of today will build this magnificent structure of human civilization in a new and improved form, based on, as you say, service and love. I mean, you couldn't find more two profound pieces of guidance to it. And so it's up to the young people, and by young people, and I'm of a certain age, so most people are young to me, but it's up to the young people to start taking a hold of their power, understand that they are of infinite value. Each individual is of more worth than the greatest civilization that ever lived. Why? Because civilizations come and go. Mm-hmm. Your soul is infinite. That's a long time. Yeah. It's a very, very long time. So each and every one of you, no matter what society tells you, whatever labels society places upon you or limitations they place upon you, you are of infinite beauty, infinite power, and infinite life. You have the spark of the divine within you, no matter who you are. Every one of us. Tall, short, fat, thin, black, white, dumb, smart, makes no difference. Mm-hmm. We are of equal value. In this life, we look like this. In another life, we'll look like something else. It's up to you. You'll do it. We'll be doing our bit, and we'll be handing you a magnificent foundation upon which you can now build this world based on love and service. Mm-hmm. And you'll do fine. We got here. We survived the worst of it. You can now build upon the work that we're doing and make this magnificent life on Earth almost, not quite, but almost heaven on Earth.
I kind of see this vision in my mind where our generation, perhaps we were more of the blunt instruments, breaking down the gates of the castle, and our children are actually going to go do the mopping up part and the recreation here of our world. How do you see that?
No, that's exactly right, and thank you for bringing it up, because that is exactly where we are. And even Buddha, when he was influencing his movement 2,500 years ago, he said, because he was living in a very primitive time and he had to use primitive concepts to communicate the incommunicable. Mm-hmm. And so even he admitted that there will come a time where spiritual development will be so advanced that his words will seem dull and uninspiring. Just like this book, we have to, it's nice to know all the high level things, but right now, we have to transition from where we are to where we need to be. So this book is useful now, but in 100 years, they'll look back at this and say, my God, that is tactics for tiny tots. What a dull and uninspired people we were. We know that. But we have a real and practical job to do right now. And And you're exactly right. We are the blunt instrument, but not because we're obtuse or dense or uneducated or ignorant. Right here, right now, we have to do what we have to do so you can do what you can do.
Yeah.
So we're acutely aware of the limitations. I would love to give a more elevated description of what's going on, but it would be understood by 5% of the people.
Right.
See, key to leadership is communication. You've got to communicate in a language they understand, in ways they can understand, and in time you will be discarded and understand that.
Right.
Your life is nothing more than another small piece of protein in a universal DNA, so to speak. And every little piece of protein, every life that you live, adds to this collective, non-physical, non-localized consciousness, if that makes sense.
Right. It makes total sense. One of my mentors told me as I was a kid, you go to war with the bullets you have. So in some cases here, yes, we have the blunt instruments, but they were called for. And of course, the nature of the war changes. The nature of reality, of course, is transitional. So too are those weapons of war, as we will discuss tomorrow again in the War Correspondent Show. Folks, please join us at 4 p.m. Tomorrow for that. Let me just go through a few of the comments I put a star on during the conversation. Gail says, I can't wait to read your book. So Gail, Tigner, yes, I have the link here to the Amazon page here, amazon.com. You'll see it in the description box below. Let me just bring that up on the screen for you there. Max says, this should be in 5th grade teaching and repeated. I agree. This is why we're having this show, and this is why I wanted to have this amazing conversation and share with you all the greatness that awaits you here from Mr. Bosi. I think it was absolutely important, and I want to do more. So if Mr. Bosi is willing, I'd love to develop this even more, if not just for my audience, but for my children and for myself. I think it's that important. Susan says, outstanding discussion, so insightful and enlightened. Thank you, Mr. Bosi. Thank you, JC. Well, thank you, Susan. I appreciate that. Mr. Bosi, before we go today, is there any updates? You just ran an election there and Australia won. Is there anything else you want to share with the audience members? This last update here on March 20th, Mr. Bosi, you do not negotiate with evil, you destroy it. Is that a topic we can get into here safely on YouTube, or do we leave that for tomorrow on Rumble? And is there anything else you would like to share with the audience here before we part ways?
Let's have a think. I can talk about, just very briefly, the election. I can cover that today and tomorrow, but the short version is we had a tactical defeat in that none of us were elected. We had a strategic victory, which is what you want, in that now New South Wales, the state in which we had the election, and the whole of Australia has seen again firsthand the level of corruption. There are countless reports of corrupt behaviour by Electoral Commission officials, which is fantastic. This is this awakening process, and as I warned everybody, our job is to save Australia, not get elected. One is a means to an end, and one is an end, and so not to become dispirited. I mean, human nature, you want to win. I get that, but this is the nature of war, where wins are few and far between. We win eventually, I have no doubt about that, but a terrific strategic victory in that everybody from the New South Wales Electoral Commissioner down is now subject to questioning, and fair questioning about the conduct of the election, the removal of ballot boxes in private vehicles by unidentified individuals, and a strange discrepancy on the number of formal and informal votes, which I'll get into tomorrow in detail. So tactical defeat, no election result, nobody in power, but certainly strategic victory, whereas corrupt here, and even more stories are coming out about the level of corruption, which is fantastic, because we cannot move forward as a nation until we clean up the electoral process, and that becomes now priority number one.
Wow. I love it. Thank you so much, Mr. Bosi, and thank you for your time today. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us on this live interactive show. I do promise to continue working at this subject matter and trying my best to share all of this information with you guys. In the meantime, of course, you can like, share, and subscribe here on YouTube to stay abreast of all the new videos coming up. And please also join us on Rumble tomorrow at 4 p.m. for the War Correspondent Show. Let me bring that up for the audience members there too. And for the sake of this conversation, also, folks, if you haven't already seen it, please do go and check out the Pluto, the Destroyer special episode we put back on March 23rd. It really sets the stage for the conversation we're having about the changing of the guard, the falling away of the old world, and the ushering in of the new world. And perhaps through that video, through that understanding, you will find your own way through this process. You will find your own mission and join this fight so to speak. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining. I'm Jean-Claude at Beyond Mystic. I love you, and thank you, Mr. Bosi, again. And we'll see you again tomorrow at 4 p.m. Eastern. Au revoir.